Corruption Prevention Strategies. CPS 115N. Course Journey. This course is not just a textbook. It is a map through one of society's most pressing challenges: corruption. From understanding what corruption really is, to building fair systems that fight it, to learning how to investigate and discipline offenders, every unit is a step deeper into the complex world of ethics, law, and governance. Unit 1. The Nature of Corruption. We begin at the root. What exactly is corruption? How does it start? Why does it spread? And what forms does it take in everyday life and institutions? Students explore the causes, from greed to systemic failure, and learn about the heavy costs, both financial and moral, that corruption imposes on society. Unit 2. Institutional and governmental processes. Once we understand the problem, we examine the official frameworks designed to fight it. This unit unpacks the King reports on governance, South African legislation, and other concrete measures governments use to curb corruption. It reveals both the strengths and the shortcomings of policy. Unit 3. Evaluating the fight against corruption in South Africa. Here, the focus sharpens on the South African context. Students critically assess the effectiveness of current laws, the role of the public and private sectors, and even the media. We confront uncomfortable questions, such as allegations of corruption within SAPS, and consider what obstacles stand in the way of a more effective national response. Unit 4. Theft, Fraud, and Prevention Strategies. This unit shifts from diagnosis to strategy. What works in prevention? We cover clear zero-tolerance policies, rigorous staff vetting, strict tender processes, random audits, fair pay structures, and integrity management. Students learn how organizations can close the loopholes before corruption ever takes root. Unit 5. Fair and legitimate disciplinary procedures. When corruption or misconduct is uncovered, punishment must be fair, transparent, and legally sound. This unit explains the Labor Relations Act, progressive discipline, grievance procedures, service contracts, and the rights of employees. It balances accountability with justice. Unit 6. Formal and informal disciplinary inquiries. Students then learn the practical difference between informal warnings and full disciplinary inquiries. We examine the roles of unions, the importance of both procedural and substantive fairness, and how to ensure that justice is both done and seen to be done. Unit 7. Investigating alleged misconduct or corruption. This is the detective's toolkit. Students discover how investigations should be carried out, from mandates and principles to entrapment, polygraphs, surveillance, and monitoring. The unit also explains how to report findings, suspend staff, and prepare formal charges. Unit 8. Disciplinary hearings in practice. Finally, the course culminates in the hearing room. Students step into the shoes of both investigator and chairperson, learning the step-by-step process of disciplinary hearings, the rights of the accused, the submission of evidence, and the lodging of appeals. This is where theory meets practice, where corruption cases are tested, argued, and resolved. Conclusion: by the end of the course, students will have walked the full path, from identifying corruption to understanding laws and policies, to designing prevention strategies, investigating cases, and ensuring fair outcomes through hearings. Corruption is a complex enemy, but with knowledge and discipline, it can be confronted. Welcome to Corruption Prevention Strategies, CPS 115N. Dear student, you are about to begin a journey into one of the most important battles of our time: the fight against corruption. Corruption is not only about stolen money or dishonest officials. It's about broken trust, weakened institutions, and communities left without hope. This course equips you with the knowledge and tools to stand against it, whether in government, business, or everyday life. We start by looking at what corruption really is where it comes from, how it shows up in daily practices, and why it costs a nation far more than just money. You'll learn to see the hidden patterns and understand the real consequences behind the headlines. From there, we move into the laws, policies, and official reports that shape South Africa's fight against corruption. You'll explore the King reports, legislation, and the many ways institutions try to protect integrity. But we don't stop at theory. You will be asked to think critically about how effective these measures really are. Are they working? What role does the media play? How do government, business, and the police fit into the bigger picture? This is where your analytical skills come alive. Then comes the practical side. Prevention strategies. You'll discover how organizations can protect themselves with strict policies, proper staff selection, strong security, and regular audits. These are the shields that stop corruption before it even begins. We also tackle the delicate but vital issue of discipline. You will learn what fair, transparent, and legal disciplinary processes look like, and why justice must never be abused. From informal warnings to formal inquiries, you'll understand how to balance accountability with fairness. As the course progresses, you step into the shoes of an investigator. You'll study how to conduct investigations, gather evidence, and prepare charges, while respecting rights and procedures. Finally, you'll enter the world of disciplinary hearings, where cases are tested, decisions are made, and appeals are heard. By the end of this course, you won't just know about corruption, you'll know how to fight it. You will carry with you the skills to strengthen institutions, protect communities, and become part of the generation that chooses integrity over shortcuts. Welcome to CPS 111.5 Corruption Prevention Strategies. Your learning here is not just for yourself. It's for the country, for the workplace, and for the future. Unit 1. The Nature of Corruption. Welcome to the first unit of Corruption Prevention Strategies. We begin where every true anti-corruption effort must begin, by looking corruption straight in the eye. This unit is your guided tour through what corruption really is, how it works, why it spreads, and the forms it takes in everyday public and corporate life. Nothing is left out. Because only a full, unflinching understanding gives you the power to fight back. Corruption as a chain crime. Corruption rarely stands alone. It is often part of a crime chain that leads to or ends in fraud committed by a company official. A corrupt relationship between a company official and an external person can trigger repeated fraud by both parties. An official may commit fraud motivated by a kickback promised by the outside partner. In such cases, both the external role player or fictitious service provider, the offender of passive corruption, and the company official, the offender of active corruption, can be charged with fraud and corruption. Because corruption grows on multiple levels of society, internal investigators must be fully aware of the special investigation procedures that apply. These cases are often complex and difficult to prove in court, which is why a clear grasp of principles and process is essential. Tip for learners. You are advised to refer back to Course I, Module 3, Paragraph 5.6 and carefully read the explanation of both the legal principles and the human behaviors that constitute corruption. Before diving into investigative techniques, we give you this complete overview of the problem crime itself, even repeating some key material from Course I to ensure a solid foundation. E. What does the crime of corruption involve? Corruption exists in both active and passive forms. For this course, we define it as follows. Note that there is no single official definition in criminology or government literature. The acts themselves describe conduct but do not define corruption. Active corruption. When a person with authority unlawfully and corruptly grants or offers to grant another person any physical goods or benefit in exchange for some action, non-action, behavior, or other benefit to be provided later by the recipient. Passive corruption. When a person unlawfully agrees to receive or actually receives any physical goods or benefit in exchange for some form of benefit or behavior from an official who has authority and capacity to enable such benefit. Important. In some cases, the state, prosecution, does not have to prove that the actor truly had the ability to enable the benefit. Sometimes the active offender merely creates the impression that he or she can deliver the benefit. and the passive offender acts on that misrepresentation. This still counts. Reference: The Prevention of Corruption, Act 94 of 1992 and Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities. Act 12 of 2004 give wide descriptions of acts and circumstances but no one-line definition of corruption. 15.2 Causes of corruption. Corruption is a worldwide phenomenon that has existed for centuries in varying degrees. In South Africa, it has become especially prominent in recent years for reasons beyond the scope of this unit. But the following are generally accepted as the most important causes at this stage of our country's development and history: decline in morals and ethics, the importance of power and its overemphasis, greed and the desire for self-enrichment, socio-economic conditions, poverty, and unemployment, institutional reasons such as mismanagement and weak checks and balances, the apartheid legacy and the process of transformation. Tini with B3, manifestations of corruption in broad terms. Among its many faces, the most prominent manifestations include violation of formal rules governing the allocation of public resources by officials in exchange for financial gain or political support, behavior deviating from normal duties of an official empowered with decision-making and authority, for personal, family, private clique, pecuniary, or status gains, abuse of power, usually for personal gain or to benefit a group or individual to whom allegiance is owed, a symptom of weak state management. Institutions designed to regulate citizen-state relations are hijacked for personal enrichment and patronage, maladministration, sidestepping of policy and regulations, inefficiency, and prejudice against intended beneficiaries, omission of financial control measures, and manipulation of tenders to benefit favored groups and individuals. These manifestations are drawn from international research, not only South Africa's situation. 15.3.1 Specific manifestations of corruption. Here are the key forms you will encounter, each with a clear example. Bribery, promising, offering, or giving a benefit that improperly affects an official's actions or decisions. Example: a traffic officer accepts a cash payment to avoid issuing a speed fine. Embezzlement, theft of resources by persons entrusted with them. Example: hospital staff steal medicines and sell them to private pharmacists. Fraud, behaviors that fool others into providing an undeserved benefit. Example: a salaries clerk registers a fictitious employee to collect the salary. Extortion, coercing someone to provide a benefit to an official in exchange for acting or failing to act. Example: a municipal health official threatens to close a restaurant on fabricated charges unless the owner provides regular meals. Abuse of power, using vested authority to improperly benefit oneself or another, or to discriminate improperly. Example: during a tender process, the head of department signals that a specific contractor should be chosen before actual selection. Conflict of interests, acting or failing to act on a matter where the official or a related party has an interest. Example: an official awards a tender to a company in which his/her partner is a director. Insider trading, abuse of privileged information, using information gained through office to give unfair advantage. Example: a local government official tips off friends about upcoming rezoning so they can buy properties cheaply. Favoritism, providing services or resources according to personal affiliations such as ethnicity, religion, or party politics. Example: a regional manager ensures only people from his tribe win food supply tenders in his area. Nepotism, ensuring family members are appointed or receive contracts from state resources, similar to conflict of interests and favoritism. Example: a head of department appoints a relative despite more suitable candidates being available. Maus, Mrinana. Authentic services and the risk of corruption. Public servants occupy positions of trust and power because of the authority, decision-making, resources, and sensitive services under their control. They face daily opportunities to either initiate corruption or be solicited into it. Some telling examples: executive members committing any of the above manifestations during staff appointments, contract awards, and service considerations. Public service officials responsible for issuing identity documents, passports, driver's licenses, motor vehicle registration papers, and similar documents who issue false papers as part of corrupt activities. Law enforcement officials granting leniency to offenders as part of corrupt dealings. These examples show how even authentic, routine services can become gateways to corruption when oversight is weak and temptation is strong. Why this unit matters. By the end of Unit 1, you will have a 360-degree view of corruption, how it links to fraud, how active and passive corruption operate, what drives it in society, and how it manifests from bribery to nepotism. This foundation is essential before moving into the next units on legislation, evaluation, prevention strategies, fair disciplinary processes, investigations, and hearings. Only by understanding corruption in all its forms can you hope to prevent, detect, and defeat it. Consequences of corruption. Corruption is never harmless. While it may appear to be a private deal between two people, its effects ripple outward, escalating over time until entire institutions and communities feel the damage. What often starts as a hidden agreement ends up shaping service delivery, public trust, and even national stability. The following consequences show how corruption eats away at society layer by layer. A. Unqualified staff in critical roles. When staff are appointed through corrupt influence rather than merit, positions are filled by people without the necessary qualifications. This leads to incompetence, poor decision-making, and failing service delivery. Citizens suffer because the people meant to serve them simply cannot perform their duties properly. B. Substandard services from ill-equipped providers. Corrupt tender processes reward contracts to companies, groups, or individuals that lack the capacity or expertise to deliver. The result is substandard services, half-built roads, poorly supplied clinics, and projects that collapse long before their intended lifespan. ZC. Overpayment and wasted resources. Even when services are delivered, corruption often means that they come at inflated costs. Governments and institutions overpay for services that could have been obtained at fairer rates. This waste diverts scarce resources away from urgent needs such as healthcare, housing, and education. D. Fraudulent identity and travel documents. Corruption in departments responsible for issuing passports, identity documents, and driver's licenses allows unqualified individuals to obtain official documents. The fallout is severe. Crime syndicates open fictitious bank accounts with false IDs. Roads become more dangerous when unqualified drivers obtain licenses fraudulently. E. Escalating abuse of false documents. Once false documents circulate, their misuse multiplies. Crime syndicates use them to build networks of deception, making it harder for authorities to authenticate records. This spirals into even more crime, as fraud and organized crime feed off compromised systems. F. A victimless crime that hurts the nation. Because corruption is a secretive act between two consenting parties, it is sometimes wrongly labeled as victimless. In truth, the entire nation is the victim. Corruption drains resources, undermines service delivery, and erodes trust in government and institutions. G. Long-term damage. That goes unnoticed. Much corruption is never detected or reported. Its hidden nature means that communities suffer its effects for years without realizing the source. Schools without supplies, clinics without medicine, roads left unrepaired. The negative impact on financial resources and service delivery lingers long after the act itself. H. Public outrage and unrest. When citizens can no longer tolerate poor services, they take to the streets. Communities across South Africa have protested, sometimes violently, against misadministration, misappropriation of funds, incompetence of officials, and corruption. These protests show that corruption is not only a governance issue, but also a spark for social instability. Final reflection. The consequences of corruption are like cracks in the foundation of a house. At first, they may seem small or hidden, but over time they spread until the entire structure is at risk of collapse. From poor appointments to fraudulent documents, From wasted money to riots in the streets, corruption leaves no corner of society untouched. The unspoken side of corruption. There is a darker side of corruption that often goes unmentioned. When an official consents to a corrupt act, agreeing to provide or accept irregular benefits, they surrender a part of their control to the other party. This submission does not just settle a single transaction. It opens the door to repetition, extension, and escalation into even more serious corruption. This principle links to what you studied in Course Y, Module 1 under the free choice rationalization theory. Success in crime breeds repetition. Corruption follows this exact pattern. Even if no one else ever knows, the consenting official has already become part of a corrupt cycle. Soon, favoritism and dishonesty are no longer isolated incidents, but an ingrained way of life. Xinhua 4. 1. The cost of corruption. The costs of corruption go far beyond lost money. They are widespread, multi-layered, and corrosive to every aspect of governance and society. 4 broad categories of costs can be distinguished. A. Macro-fiscal costs. Corruption drains the financial lifeblood of a country. Lost revenues include unpaid taxes, customs levies, licensing fees, and traffic fines. On the spending side, the state is crippled by inflated contracts, corruption, loadings, and fraudulent fronting. Together, these pressures starve the national budget. B. Reduced productive investment and growth. For countries needing foreign capital, corruption is a red flag. Long-term investors who could build sustainable growth are repelled by the perception of risk. Instead, corruption attracts opportunists seeking quick profits from shady ventures. Aid programs suffer as funds are diverted. Regulatory abuse scares away honest enterprise, and misprocurement drives costs even higher. C. Costs to the public and the poor. Corruption diverts resources away from their intended purposes. When bribes determine who gets land, healthcare, or legal protection, the poor are left behind. Services become poor in quality and distorted in allocation, benefiting the few at the expense of the many. The result? Inequality widens, social and economic divisions harden, and trust in government evaporates. D. Loss of confidence in public institutions. When officials can be bought, the very pillars of the state weaken. Citizens lose confidence in the rule of law. Contracts are disrespected. Property rights feel insecure, and civil order breaks down. Ultimately, corruption undermines the legitimacy of the state itself. Economists and criminologists estimate that South Africa could be losing as much as 20% of national revenue to corruption. A staggering figure that, even if approximate, signals just how deep the rot runs. Institutional and governmental processes of combating corruption. Recognizing these devastating consequences, governments around the world began intensifying anti-corruption measures in the 1990s. South Africa's response included institutional reforms and a focus on corporate governance, anchored in the influential King Reports. Oitbai 1. The King Reports. King 4, 1994. The first King Report on corporate governance was issued by the King Committee under the Institute of Directors of Southern Africa. It aimed to consolidate what had become widely accepted norms of governance and ethics. Its application, however, was limited. It applied mainly to JSE-listed companies, government departments, state-owned companies, banks, and insurance firms. King II, 2002. This second report broadened the scope and deepened the principles of corporate governance. It identified 7 fundamental characteristics that should guide ethical corporate behavior: discipline, transparency, independence, accountability, responsibility, fairness, social responsibility. King II applied to a much broader range of institutions, including government departments, state-owned companies, and all JSE-listed firms. King III, 2010. By the early 2000s, changes in both South Africa's Companies Act and international governance trends prompted a third report. King III, effective from 1 March 2010, shifted the paradigm from a comply or explain model to an apply or explain approach. This meant that every entity, whether public or private, regardless of size or incorporation form, had to disclose how it applied governance principles. If principles were not applied, reasons had to be given. The emphasis was on leadership, sustainability, and corporate citizenship, aligning governance with the needs of all stakeholders, including shareholders and institutional investors, creditors and lenders, suppliers and customers, regulators and employees, unions and the media, analysts, consumers, and society at large, communities, auditors, and potential investors. This approach aimed to empower stakeholders with transparency, enabling them to make informed judgments about governance levels within organizations. As W. Calcoen noted in the Corporate Governance Review, 2011, King III marked South Africa's significant leap toward a comprehensive governance model that recognizes the balance between profit, ethics, and social responsibility. 15.5.2 South African legislation. The King reports gave real momentum to the acceptance of sound corporate governance in South Africa. Building on that momentum, a wide range of laws were promulgated to tighten accountability and strengthen anti-corruption mechanisms. Public Service Act, 1994, establishes honesty and integrity as core competences of public officials. Prevention of Organized Crime Act, 121 of 1998, targets organized crime, racketeering, money laundering, and gang activity, provides for asset forfeiture, recovery of unlawful proceeds, and creation of the Criminal Assets Recovery Account. Competition Act, 89 of 1998, sets up the Competition Commission, Tribunal and Appeal Court to regulate restrictive practices, abuse of dominance, and mergers. Insider Trading Act, 4 of 1998, prohibits the misuse of insider information in securities trading, introduces criminal and civil penalties, empowers the Financial Services Board, and establishes a directorate to prosecute offenders. Promotion of Administrative Justice Act, 3 of 2000 gives effect to Section 33 of the Constitution, ensuring administrative action that is lawful, reasonable, and procedurally fair. Public Finance Management Act, 1 of 1999, PFMA, regulates financial management in national government, requiring efficiency, accountability, and proper handling of assets and liabilities. Municipal Finance Management Act, 56 of 2005, MFMA, ensures sound financial management at municipal level, establishes treasury norms and standards. Protected Disclosures Act, 26 of 2000, protects whistleblowers in both public and private sectors who disclose unlawful or irregular conduct. Witness Protection Act, 112 of 1998, creates the Office for Witness Protection, provides temporary and permanent protection services, and integrates witness care into the courts. Banks Act, 94 of 1990, regulates and supervises public companies taking deposits from the public. Regulation of Interception of Communications and Provision of Communication-Related Information Act, 70 of 2002, RICA, governs interception of communications, monitoring of signals, and the obligations of service providers, establishes interception centers and creates offenses for non-compliance. Companies Act, 71 of 2008, provides a framework for ethical corporate governance, company regulation, and accountability. Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, 12 of 2004, South Africa's flagship anti-corruption law, covered in detail later in this unit. 5th point, 5 point. Institution-specific measures. South Africa's fight against corruption has not been limited to laws. Since the first King Report, 1994, multiple institutional measures have been introduced. Anti-corruption summits, 1997 onwards. Starting with the National Anti-Corruption Summit of April 1999, where public and private sectors pledged to adopt zero tolerance and sectoral strategies. National Anti-Corruption Forum, 1999. A cross-sectoral platform including government, justice, police, and private sector, Delegates committed to developing a culture of zero tolerance and meeting twice a year. National Public Service Anti-Corruption Strategy, 2002, adopted by DPSA. It called for stronger policy, cooperation with parastatals, scorpions, NPA, Auditor General, Specialized Commercial Courts, Public Protector, PSC, SIU, Asset Forfeiture Unit, ICD, SAPS, and systemic reforms. Batho Pele, People First, Initiative, 1997. A policy framework for citizen-centered service delivery, later expanded into the Batho Pele White Paper. Its 8 principles: consultation, service standards, access, courtesy, information, openness and transparency, redress, and value for money, demanded that public servants re-engineer back-office and front-office operations and strengthen both internal and external communication. Auditor General's annual audits revealed misuse of municipal budgets, leading to interventions, investigations, and prosecutions. Anti-corruption hotlines launched across government departments, SARS, and SAPS, Crime Stop. Many banks and companies in the private sector also set up whistleblower services, websites, and media exposure. Online reporting platforms and press investigations often triggered interventions and prosecutions. Prosecutions. Senior officials across many departments were removed from their posts. Even police commissioners were prosecuted for corruption. In the private sector, Competition Act contraventions led to heavy fines. Mining directors faced liquidation. Fraudulent investment firms collapsed, and non-compliant companies were deregistered. Corporate and banking sector responses. In reaction to rising fraud and corruption, these sectors tightened financial policies and internal anti-corruption measures. Prosecutions occur daily in courts countrywide, though private sector corruption tends to receive less media coverage than public sector scandals. Baksh 6. Evaluation. Combating corruption in South Africa. Corruption remains one of the most contentious issues in South Africa, dominating headlines and public debate. Evaluating the fight against it involves examining laws, institutional measures, and human factors. EFARNGS 6.01. Efficiency of current legislation. South African law provides a solid framework for prosecuting corruption. Many successful prosecutions prove that the legislative foundation works. However, concerns exist, especially regarding the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, 2004. The 100,000 threshold problem. Section 34 requires persons in authority to report corruption involving amounts of 100,000 or more. This creates a perception that corruption below that value is minor and need not be reported. In reality, corruption at any scale must be addressed. Reporting to any police official. The Act requires reports to be made to the police, but it does not spell out investigative responsibilities. Without specialized knowledge, finance, tenders, procurement, ordinary police stations may mishandle complex cases. Lack of provisions for internal reporting. The Act does not oblige reports to company directors or department heads, nor does it require steps to prevent recurrence. Difficulty in quantifying corruption. Many acts of corruption do not have an immediately identifiable monetary value. The harm often becomes measurable only years later, making the threshold impractical. Conclusion. The Act sets a valuable starting point but requires revision to close these gaps and strengthen enforcement. Bathuan 6.2 measures implemented by the public sector policies such as the National Anti-Corruption Forum, Public Service Anti-Corruption Strategy, and Batho Pele White Paper provide a robust policy base. The challenge lies in consistent communication and execution of these strategies. Implementation gaps remain the Achilles heel. 15.6.3 measures implemented by business and industry. Internal controls, policies, and investigative units exist in most companies. Yet, reluctance persists, especially around full compliance with the Companies Act and other provisions. Many financial institutions and large companies have set up internal anti-corruption investigation services. PIME 6.4 Cooperation. Across sectors, the President and Cabinet have repeatedly called for stronger cooperation between government, parastatals, and the private sector. Corruption operates across boundaries, and so must the fight against it. Only a united front can tackle corruption effectively at all levels of society. 15.6.5 Alleged corruption amongst SAPS officials. Despite SAPS introducing internal initiatives to curb corruption, public trust remains deeply shaken. High-profile suspensions and prosecutions of commissioners of police have not restored confidence. In fact, they have worsened the image of the police. Alarming reports include manipulation or disappearance of evidence, undermining prosecutions, leaks of confidential operations, allowing dangerous criminals to escape after being tipped off, collusion with syndicates and drug dealers, enabling organized crime to continue unhindered, direct involvement of police officials in hijackings and robberies, leading to arrests and prosecutions, mistrust within police ranks. Honest officers, speaking anonymously, report that nepotism and favoritism protect corrupt colleagues. This creates fear. Officers worry about their safety when working alongside corrupt counterparts. The result: operational effectiveness suffers and morale collapses. 5.6.6 Cooperation. Between SAPS and private investigation agencies. From the perspective of private investigation agencies, SAPS often shows hostility and antagonism rather than cooperation. This hampers the pursuit of justice. To improve outcomes, private investigators must strive to overcome this barrier. Advanced training is critical so that private agencies can both complement and support official investigations, creating a stronger united front against corruption and crime. 6. 7. Relationship between the press and government. Although media-government dynamics fall beyond this course's main scope, it is important to note that the relationship is strained and mistrustful. Cooperation is urgently needed, but current realities include one-sided reporting, with little recognition of resource constraints that limit service delivery, shallow understanding of long-term development and service plans, leading to misrepresentation of delays as corruption, focus on failure rather than success. The press highlights shortcomings but rarely acknowledges achievements, minimal verification of allegations, which often results in unfair reputational damage to officials, disregard for legal safeguards such as presumption of innocence and protection from defamation. This fuels public perception that all officials are corrupt or incompetent. Because of these tensions, government has floated the controversial idea of an Information Act to limit unfair reporting, while verification of allegations before publication would be ideal. The practical difficulties are immense. Distinguishing between corruption, maladministration, inefficiency, and resource incapacity is not easy. Yet, it is crucial for balanced reporting. 6.8 Governmental issues. It must be acknowledged that government has done much to criminalize corruption and establish anti-corruption strategies. The problem lies not in policy, but in execution. Weak enforcement, inconsistent prosecution, and selective application of the law undermine progress. Without consistency, even the best frameworks fail. Fendi 6.9 Factors to overcome for more effective combating of corruption. South Africa faces corruption at such a scale that no excuse can justify inaction. Every obstacle must be treated as a challenge to overcome. Key priorities include revision of the Prevention of Corrupt Activities Act to address flaws. C. 15.6.1 Reinforcement of equality before the law. No person, regardless of race, politics, or position, is above it. Clarification of authority among law enforcement agencies, ending rivalry and antagonism, an end to redeploying disgraced executives or awarding them golden handshakes, enforcing accountability as inherent to position and authority at all levels, stricter standards for appointments, emphasizing integrity, track record, and competence, broadening participation in anti-corruption campaigns, including mid- and low-level officials, regular revision and communication of departmental anti-corruption policies, mandatory induction programs where all appointees sign declarations of accountability and compliance, ongoing training at all levels on anti-corruption issues, active encouragement of whistleblowing, ensuring protection and anonymity, expansion of anti-corruption forums across departments, public communication of anti-corruption efforts. To restore trust and confidence, specialized training for law enforcement agencies since complex corruption cases demand expertise in finance, tenders, and procurement. The course itself emphasizes improving the capabilities of private investigation agencies so they can play a stronger role in this collective effort. Find 6. 10. Essence of the problem. The individual's approach. All the laws, policies, and campaigns in the world mean nothing if individuals adopt the mindset that rules do not apply to me. The troubling pattern is that many senior officials, including commissioners of police, publicly condemn corruption, only to later face charges themselves. The problem repeats at lower levels. Officials responsible for contracts, funds, documents, or prosecutions sometimes believe their authority shields them from accountability. This attitude, that anti-corruption measures apply only to others, is at the heart of the crisis. Solution: anti-corruption campaigns must operate at a personalized level. Officials must internalize the principle that accountability is universal, position is no shield, and zero tolerance applies to all. 6. 11. Composition of an institutional or departmental anti-corruption plan. Every department or institution must develop a living plan that goes beyond rhetoric. Key elements include a policy statement highlighting the importance of anti-corruption and affirming accountability and zero tolerance, a code of good conduct and ethics, control measures and procedures to prevent abuse, communication of policies and procedures to all staff, whistleblowing channels for reporting corruption, protection of whistleblowers with possible recognition or rewards, detection techniques to measure corruption risk, including assessments of staff loyalty and compliance, systematic record-keeping with statistics of all irregularities and corruption cases, establishment of an anti-corruption forum within each department or unit. Only by embedding such plans into daily practice can institutions build integrity into their DNA. 15.7. Investigation of corruption procedures. Investigating corruption is never straightforward. Unlike ordinary fraud cases, corruption almost always involves relationships, secrecy, and abuse of authority. For this reason, investigators must go beyond standard fraud procedures, see paragraph 14 above, and apply additional methods designed specifically to expose corruption. Additional requirements for extending fraud cases to corruption. When a fraud case expands into corruption charges, investigators must carefully build a chain of evidence that links internal and external role players. Key requirements include proof of authority of the internal suspect. Investigators must obtain evidence, supported by a sworn affidavit, outlining the position of the internal staff member, the active corruption suspect. This evidence should show the authority and decision-making power the suspect held, and how that authority could be abused to manipulate transactions. Evidence of a relationship between role players. It is vital to establish that a relationship existed between the internal suspect and the external role player. Convincing evidence that this relationship had a corrupt purpose or intent will significantly strengthen the case. Evidence of contact under suspicious circumstances. Any proof of unusual or irregular contact between the two suspects, meetings, communications, or unexplained exchanges is critical. Such evidence supports the inference of corrupt collaboration, link between fraud and corrupt benefit. Investigators must demonstrate how the fraud committed by the internal staff member benefited not only the individual, but also the external partner. Showing this link makes it possible to charge both parties with corruption. Core elements to prove in corruption investigations. As with all crimes, corruption has essential elements that must be proven. Learners should note the parallels between these elements and the general elements of crime covered in Course I and A. Legality principle. Investigators must demonstrate that the corrupt acts fall under prohibitions contained in the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act and other relevant laws. B. Policy and regulatory frameworks. Every organization operates within rules, financing policies, tendering procedures, service delivery guidelines, etc. Investigations must show how suspects deliberately bypassed or manipulated these rules. C. Authority of the suspect. The suspect's assigned authority over services, contracts, or finances is central. Investigators must map out the scope of this authority to show how it was abused in the corrupt act. D. Actions to manipulate or omit. Compliance investigators must detail specific actions taken by the suspects, manipulating tender procedures, ignoring financial control measures, circumventing service delivery protocols. Each act of manipulation strengthens the corruption case. E. Consequences of corruption. Finally, investigators must demonstrate the harm caused or likely to be caused by the corrupt acts. This may include financial loss, poor service delivery, weakened institutional trust, or broader social consequences. Final reflection. Investigating corruption is like piecing together a puzzle where many of the pieces are deliberately hidden. It requires patience, technical knowledge, and the ability to connect relationships with transactions, authority with abuse, and irregular actions with their consequences.
In 15.7 Case Dockets, Evidence Requirements. When compiling case dockets for corruption investigations, investigators must ensure they include all relevant forms of evidence, such as copies of policies and control documents relevant to the case, witness statements from superiors confirming the suspect's level of authority, scope of duties, and how that authority was misused, witness statements from peers and subordinates who may have observed irregular actions, documentary evidence such as communication records between suspects, misleading reports to management, tender documents, purchase orders, and invoices, evidence of contact or meetings between suspects under suspicious circumstances, proof of actual or potential benefits received by any parties to the alleged corruption. Important note: actual benefit is not required to prove corruption. As with fraud, it is the potential and intention to benefit that makes the crime prosecutable. Investigators must also distinguish whether incompetence or inefficiency is truly corruption under law, or whether it is a consequence of corruption committed earlier. For example, the appointment of unqualified staff or the awarding of a weak contract. Theft, fraud, and corruption prevention strategies. Crime statistics may suggest a decline in reported crimes, but many criminologists argue this is misleading. They point to alarmingly low conviction rates compared with arrests, suggesting that many crimes simply go unreported due to lack of faith in the justice system. The rise of internal investigators in industry and business highlights this declining confidence in state processes. Companies are no longer waiting for state investigations. They demand effective strategies for both detection and prevention. After all, appointing more investigators is not enough. True protection comes from strong prevention systems. 6. Key aspects of a prevention strategy. While strategies differ by company, sector, or product, certain elements are universal. Any effective theft, fraud, and corruption prevention plan must include the following: clear zero-tolerance policy. All offenders must be prosecuted, regardless of the scale of theft or their position. Strict and thorough staff selection screening must extend to all shortlisted applicants, not just key positions. The goal: keep professional and habitual criminals out of the organization. Adequate security measures. Companies often rely on external security providers, but without minimum standards of efficiency. Firms must enforce strict standards and hold providers accountable. Security service surveys and risk analysis, conducted regularly to ensure risks are updated and countered effectively. Sequential reporting lines. Replace parallel structures with sequential lines to strengthen checks and balances, especially for large financial transactions. Strict tender procedures prevent manipulation or favoritism in awarding contracts. Avoid over-budgeting. Excessive budgets create the impression that funds are unlimited, making theft harder to detect and easier to hide. Ban relationship mapping in appointments. Relatives or friends of staff should not be appointed, as this fosters nepotism and weakens integrity. Prohibit photocopied invoices. Copied financial documents are too easy to falsify. Originals must always be required. Surprise audits, scheduled audits lose deterrence value. Surprise audits keep staff alert and accountable. Clear demarcation of authority and responsibilities. Grey areas create opportunities for manipulation. Responsibilities must be explicit. Job descriptions with defined responsibilities. Critical for both prevention and disciplinary inquiries. Restrict creative computer programming. Only staff who truly require programming access should have it. Openness after dismissals. Dismissing corrupt staff in secrecy weakens deterrence. Companies should be open after dismissal about fraud cases to discourage others. Integrity management programs may include polygraph testing for key personnel to assess honesty and detect past involvement in crime. Strict gift policies. No Christmas gifts, referral commissions or finder's fees. Good housekeeping. Disorderly workplaces create a perception that management doesn't care. Staff may begin by taking useless items, eventually escalating to valuables. Participation in local police forums. Senior staff should represent the company, gaining information and contributing to community safety. Use of external investigators. For serious cases, external investigators bring objectivity and greater deterrent effect than in-house staff. Whistleblower facilities proven to reduce irregularities and increase detection when employees feel safe to report wrongdoing. Awareness campaigns with banners and signs. Visual messages often influence behavior more strongly than verbal warnings. Campaigns and training for staff. Honesty, regular education on crime types and consequences shapes long-term positive behavior. Anti-crime as a standing agenda item. Every meeting should discuss crime prevention. Talking about crime regularly embeds vigilance into company culture. Fair wages and constructive treatment of staff. Companies that treat staff fairly and pay reasonable wages experience lower levels of theft and dishonesty than those perceived as exploitative. Final reflection. Crime prevention in business is not just about catching wrongdoers. It is about creating an environment where crime is difficult to commit and unattractive to attempt. Prevention strategies must be comprehensive, covering people, processes, and culture. The combination of clear rules, active detection, staff awareness, and fairness gives companies the best chance to protect themselves from theft, fraud, and corruption. 16.2. Detection strategies. Prevention and detection work hand in hand. Many of the prevention strategies already discussed double up as detection tools because they make irregularities visible. For example, strong tender procedures and strict demarcation of responsibilities can reveal fraud before it spreads. In addition to those overlapping measures, companies and institutions can deploy specific detection strategies aimed at uncovering theft and fraud that are already happening. Key detection strategies. Undercover. Operations. Deploying undercover agents inside the workplace can be highly effective when losses are significant but the culprits are unknown. Undercover staff help identify who is involved, what methods are being used, and when crimes are occurring. Unannounced and unexpected stocktaking. Traditional stocktaking is often carried out by the same staff, responsible for handling goods. This allows dishonest staff to audit themselves, hiding theft by adjusting counts. Unannounced stocktaking, conducted by independent staff not linked to the store, disrupts this cover-up and exposes losses in real time. Rotation of staff. By rotating staff in sensitive positions, such as between debtors, creditors, and payroll offices, organizations break patterns that allow fraud to remain hidden. This approach not only detects irregularities, but also prevents them, as staff know they will not remain in one position indefinitely. In short, detection strategies are about creating surprise, disruption, and independence in auditing and oversight. They flush out crimes that internal staff might otherwise conceal. The prosecution of persons accused of corruption prevention and detection are only the beginning. Without prosecution, corruption cases fall flat. The prosecution process in South African criminal courts is a structured cycle, governed mainly by the Criminal Procedure Act, CPA, and principles of the law of evidence, unless the offence is minor, such as a small statutory contravention, or traffic fine where the accused pleads guilty immediately. Under Sections 75 and 76 of the CPA, most corruption cases follow a multi-stage process that can be lengthy and complex. The TIOSA prosecution cycle in criminal courts will: first appearance of the accused within 48 hours. In terms of Section 50 of the CPA, an accused held in custody must appear in court within 48 hours, or on the first court day after that. At this stage, the court will confirm whether the accused has legal representation or appoint state counsel if necessary, decide whether to release the accused on warning, grant bail, or keep them in custody pending a bail application. Importantly, the accused is not asked to plead to charges at this stage. 2. Second appearance of the accused. The court may hear a bail application. The state, often through the investigating officer, presents evidence to oppose bail if necessary. If the investigation is complete and the accused has legal representation, a plea may be entered. However, in most corruption cases, investigations are complex and still ongoing, so proceedings are postponed for further investigation and subpoenaing of witnesses. 3. Third appearance. By this point, the investigation should be complete and witnesses subpoenaed. The accused will be formally charged and asked to plead. Witnesses are warned to return on a set date for testimony. Defense lawyers often request postponements to prepare. 4. Fourth appearance, the state's case. The accused enters a plea if not already done. The prosecutor delivers an opening statement outlining charges and evidence. The defense lawyer may respond, identifying which parts of the state's case will be contested. The state calls witnesses one by one, starting with complainants and ending with the investigating officer. Witnesses are cross-examined by the defense, re-examined by the prosecutor, and may also be questioned by the judge or magistrate. Once complete, the state closes its case.
5. Fifth appearance, the defense's case. The defense lawyer calls witnesses. The accused often testifies last, though not always. Defense witnesses are cross-examined by the prosecutor and questioned by the court. After all testimony, the defense closes its case. Both sides then deliver closing arguments. The prosecutor highlights proven elements of the crime and weaknesses in the defense. The defense argues inconsistencies in the state's case and presses for acquittal. The court may adjourn to consider the verdict. Bake. Sixth appearance, verdict and sentencing. The court delivers a verdict of guilty or not guilty. If guilty, the prosecutor presents aggravating circumstances and prior convictions. The defense counters with mitigating factors, arguing for leniency. Sentencing may occur immediately or on a later date, depending on case complexity. Appeals may be lodged after sentencing or, in some instances, requested before final closure of the case. Summary of the prosecution process. The prosecution cycle can be summarized into the following stages. A. Securing the accused's presence and legal representation, bail, custody, or warning. B. Presentation of charges and plea. C. Opening arguments by prosecution and defense. D. State evidence, with examination and cross-examination of witnesses. E. Defense evidence, with examination and cross-examination of witnesses. F. Closing arguments from both sides. G. Verdict. H. Presentation of aggravating factors. State, but presentation of mitigating factors. Zero defense. J. Sentencing. Key insight: the prosecution of corruption is rarely quick. Because of the complexity of evidence, high-profile nature of cases, and defense strategies, trials can stretch for months or even years. This delay often undermines public confidence, but it remains the only legitimate pathway to justice. Fiend. Presentation of evidence. Before a court of law, when an investigator enters the courtroom, the role shifts from fact-gatherer to servant of justice. This means the investigator is not there to win at all costs, but to reveal the truth so that the court can reach a fair and just conclusion. The prosecutor, defense, and magistrate all depend on the investigator's ability to present clear, reliable, and professional testimony. Core principles. The investigator as a servant of justice, presenting evidence is about truth, not personal victory. Investigators must avoid any temptation to manipulate evidence to force a conviction. No authority to punish the investigator does not punish. That is the exclusive function of the court. Any attempt to use testimony as a form of revenge undermines the credibility of the entire case. Absolute honesty and openness. The responsibility is to show the facts exactly as they were found. Half-truths, exaggerations, or concealment will eventually backfire under cross-examination. 2.1. Practical guidance for presenting testimony professionalism and preparation dress code and conduct. Present yourself neatly and behave professionally. First impressions influence credibility. Preparation. Revisit your original statement before testifying, ideally with the prosecutor, to refresh your memory. Stick to your statement. Deviations or contradictions weaken your testimony. Presenting evidence in chief. Clearly explain your investigation procedures, findings, and conclusions. Submit exhibits such as reports, photographs, communication records, invoices, or drawings. Explain the nature, relevance, and significance of each piece of evidence for the court. Conduct in court. Always show respect to magistrates, prosecutors, and defense lawyers alike. Address the magistrate as Your Worship in every response. Make reasonable eye contact, speak audibly, and keep hands visible above the desk, a subtle signal of openness and honesty. Handling cross-examination. Expect the defense to challenge, pressure, or unsettle you. Stay calm and never lose your temper. If a question is unclear or repetitive, politely request the magistrate to intervene or ask for it to be rephrased. Use judgment when answering. Sometimes a yes or no is enough. Other times clarification is essential. Politely inform the court that your answer requires explanation and await the magistrate's ruling. Never guess or speculate. If you are not qualified to give an opinion, e.g., on forensic evidence provided by another expert, state that clearly. Common defense tactics and how to respond. Forcing yes-no answers. Insist respectfully on clarifying if a short answer would mislead. Highlighting inconsistencies. Stick to your facts. Don't shift under pressure, questioning your certainty. Show confidence in what you know, but avoid false certainty about what you don't. Golden rules: always tell the truth. Never change your version once given. Even if another witness contradicts you, stand by your personal observations. Admit what you don't know. This is safer than offering an unqualified opinion. Point 2. Courtroom conduct and restrictions, witness sequestration. You may not be present during other witnesses' testimonies unless you have already testified and been excused. No external discussions. Do not discuss the case with other witnesses, the accused, or their family friends. Irregular approaches. If a defense lawyer tries to engage you outside formal proceedings, report it immediately to the prosecutor. State witnesses' caution. Warn all state witnesses against talking about the case outside court to avoid any impression of collusion. Final insight courtroom testimony is the ultimate test of an investigator's credibility. A good investigation can collapse under poor presentation. Conversely, even a modest case can succeed when testimony is clear, truthful, consistent, and professional. Investigators must always remember they are not fighting for themselves, but for justice and the rule of law. Great. Now we are stepping into the disciplinary procedures module, which links internal investigations to fair workplace discipline. I'll expand and narrate your content so it flows smoothly, covers every key point, and is accessible for learners while remaining professional and detailed. Implementation of fair and legitimate disciplinary procedures. Introduction. Internal investigations do not end with gathering facts. They almost always lead to the implementation of disciplinary procedures, which are the organization's way of dealing with misconduct. Disciplinary action is not only about sanctioning offenders, but also about protecting the integrity of the workplace, deterring future misconduct, and upholding a culture of accountability. In cases where an offense committed by an employee is of a criminal nature, both criminal prosecution in a court of law and internal disciplinary action may follow. Some companies adopt a zero-tolerance policy, pursuing criminal prosecution in all cases of criminal activity, regardless of scale. Others adopt a more case-by-case approach, deciding whether to prosecute criminally or handle the matter internally, depending on the seriousness of the offense and its impact on the company. Important note, if a criminal offense committed at work results in a conviction, then formal disciplinary action, often dismissal, is straightforward. Management or the disciplinary committee simply confirms the conviction and executes dismissal. For this reason, many companies suspend disciplinary processes until the criminal trial concludes. However, where management decides to rely only on internal discipline, the responsibility falls on internal investigators to prove misconduct before a disciplinary committee. This requires careful preparation and evidence, similar in nature to what is used in a criminal trial. Standards of proof. Criminal trials require proof beyond reasonable doubt. Disciplinary inquiries, however, require proof on a balance of probabilities, a lower threshold. Yet, despite this difference, the principles of investigation remain the same. Evidence must be factual, credible, and properly presented. Another major difference is who presents the case. In criminal court, the prosecutor takes the lead. In disciplinary hearings, it is often the internal investigator who presents the case directly before the disciplinary committee. For this reason, investigators must be thoroughly familiar with fair and legitimate disciplinary procedures. The Labor Relations Act, LRA, the Labor Relations Act, Act 66 of 1995, is the cornerstone of workplace discipline in South Africa. It replaced older labor legislation and applies to almost all occupations, except members of the National Defense Force, the National Intelligence Service, and the South African Secret Service. Investigators are strongly encouraged to read and understand the LRA, as it has direct consequences on how disciplinary procedures should be conducted. The Act ensures fairness, consistency, and protection of employees' rights. Purpose of disciplinary actions. Disciplinary actions are not designed to punish employees in the traditional sense. Instead, they serve a corrective and progressive function aimed at changing behavior and improving performance. Labor courts consistently uphold this principle in rulings on unfair dismissal cases. Corrective and progressive discipline. Corrective and progressive discipline rests on three main principles: Correction over punishment disciplinary action should seek to correct mistakes or misconduct rather than simply punish. Warnings before dismissal. Except in cases of serious misconduct, e.g., theft, fraud, violence, employees should receive warnings and opportunities to improve before dismissal is considered. Support and training employers are expected to assist employees in improving behavior and performance. This may include training, mentoring, or counseling as referred to in the Labor Relations Act.